The morning of June 12, 1985 began like any other. In the valley of Bagram, Afghanistan, the air was cool and still. The sun had not yet climbed over the towering peaks of the Hindu Kush mountains. A deep quiet lay over the land, a silence known only to the early hours before the world awakens. At the sprawling Soviet air base, the stillness was almost peaceful. This was a place of war, a hub of military might. But in these pre-dawn moments, it slept. Sentries walked their posts, their footsteps soft on the dusty ground. Helicopters sat silent on the tarmac, waiting. Jets sat silent on the tarmac, waiting. It was a fragile peace, a temporary pause in a long and brutal conflict. Few could have imagined what was about to happen. The soldiers on duty felt the familiar rhythm of their routine. They checked their watches, thinking of the end of their shift. They thought of a warm meal. They thought of a letter from home. The base was a city unto itself, a foreign island in an ancient land. It was filled with the tools of destruction. It had its own life, its own pulse. In the nearby villages, Afghan families were also beginning to stir. The first calls to prayer would soon echo through the valleys. Life, for both the occupiers and the occupied, was about to be torn apart by an event of unimaginable scale. Why was so much ammunition gathered in one place? The answer lies in the nature of the Soviet-Afghan war. This was not a war of clear front lines, patrols, ambushes, sudden violent clashes. The Soviet army needed a constant, massive supply of ammunition. Helicopters needed rockets. Tanks needed shells. Every soldier needed thousands of rounds. Supplying an army in a landlocked, mountainous country was immense, brought in by land, or by air. A long, dangerous journey. So the Soviets created vast supply depots. Bagram, the largest of them all, they stockpiled fuel and munitions, train car after train car, loaded with every kind of munition imaginable. Artillery shells, mortar rounds, rockets for the feared Grad systems, millions upon millions of bullets. A staggering collection of explosive power, a reserve big enough to fight for months. A strategy of brute force, overwhelming firepower to crush resistance. This mountain of steel was meant to ensure victory. Ammunition was not in hardened underground bunkers. Building hardened bunkers would have been slow and expensive. Instead, it sat in the open or in simple sheds. Over 1,000 train cars packed with explosives on sidings near the airfield. The exact cause of the first explosion remains shrouded in the fog of war. Some accounts speak of a stray cigarette, a moment of carelessness by a guard. Others whisper of sabotage. The Mujahideen were becoming more sophisticated, supported by foreign intelligence. They knew hitting Soviet supply lines would hurt the 40th Army, a small team of insurgents, using the cover of darkness, slipping close to the perimeter. A single rocket fired, a lucky shot. It found its way into the heart of the ammunition dump, the spark that would ignite a volcano, a single sharp crack, then a pause. For a moment it sounded routine, then a larger second explosion. A train car of artillery shells erupted in flames. The chain reaction began. The first car's blast tore into the next, and the next, and the next. A string of firecrackers, each a railroad car packed with explosives. Detonations rippled through the depot, gathering strength. The sound was indescribable, not a single bang, a continuous, deafening roar for hours. The ground shook like an earthquake, soldiers thrown from their beds, windows shattered miles away. For the soldiers on the base, the world ended at 4:30 a.m. Sleep was replaced by a gut-wrenching concussion that lifted men from their bunks and slammed them against walls. The air was sucked from their lungs, replaced by a wave of crushing pressure. In the barracks, chaos reigned. Young conscripts, dazed and disoriented, scrambled for cover in the darkness. Was it a nuclear attack? Was the base being overrun? The roaring outside was a physical force, a wall of sound that vibrated through their very bones. The sky outside their shattered windows burned a pulsating, hellish orange. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic. The main explosion created a fireball that lit up the entire valley. For a moment it was as bright as day. This was the sun that rose at midnight. Soldiers caught in the open were incinerated instantly. Others were struck down by a hailstorm of shrapnel. Others were crushed by powerful shockwaves. Pilots scrambled to save aircraft. Mechanics dragged planes and helicopters away from fire. Helicopters, jets, unguided rockets screamed past them. Medical personnel set up makeshift aid stations, quickly overwhelmed. It was Dante's Inferno on the Afghan plains. Destruction spread beyond the base. Bagram and surrounding villages lay in the disaster's path. The shockwave tore through mud brick homes. Roofs collapsed, crushing sleeping families. Metal and fire rained without distinction. Men, women, children were killed and maimed. The explosion at Bagram was more than just a massive loss of material. It was, well, a deep and painful blow to the morale of the Soviet 40th Army. The official reports from Moscow downplayed the incident, claiming it was a minor accident with few casualties. They spoke of a fire, not a cataclysmic explosion. They simply could not admit the scale of the disaster, for it would be an admission of incompetence and vulnerability. The truth, however, spread quickly through the ranks. Every soldier knew that a huge portion of their ammunition was gone. The heart of their military machine had been dealt a crippling blow. This created a sense of unease, a feeling that they were not as invincible as they had been told. For the Soviet war effort, the consequences were immediate and severe. Military operations had to be scaled back or postponed. Convoys waited for resupply. Units in the field began rationing ammunition, counting every bullet. The confidence of the Soviet command was shaken. How could such a disaster happen at their most secure facility? The explosion exposed weaknesses in logistics and security. It was a powerful message from the Mujahideen, or from fate itself, that this war would not be won by stockpiling mountains of weapons. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, and the Soviets had just inflicted a massive one upon themselves. For Afghans near Bagram, the explosion left scars that would never heal. Immediate deaths and injuries changed lives forever. Many lost homes and livelihoods. The land was poisoned, littered with unexploded ordnance. The event entered local folklore, a story of divine retribution. Decades later, the memories of that night still haunt the Soviet veterans who survived it. Their stories are fragments of a nightmare. One soldier, a young mechanic named Yuri, remembered being thrown across his workshop by the first blast. He recalled crawling outside into a world on fire. He saw rockets without their guidance systems spinning wildly through the air. He saw their engines lit like fiery demons dancing in the sky. He spoke of the noise, a physical pressure that made it impossible to think. A sound so total that it became silence. His job was to save the helicopters, but all he could do was hide behind a concrete barrier and pray as the world exploded around him. Another veteran, a medic named Svetlana, described the makeshift hospital. She said it was not a place of healing, but a butcher's shop. The wounded came in streams, their bodies torn by shrapnel, burned by the intense heat. There were not enough supplies, not enough morphine, not enough hands. She remembered a young lieutenant, his face a mask of calm, directing rescue efforts even as his own uniform was soaked with blood from a wound in his side. She saw incredible bravery that night, but also a depth of suffering that she could never forget. The smell of burnt flesh and chemicals, she said, never truly leaves you. The official silence from Moscow was a source of great bitterness for these soldiers. Their trauma was denied, their losses erased from the official history. They were told to forget what they saw, to not speak of the true scale of the disaster. This denial was a second wound, a betrayal by the very country they were serving. For the Afghans who lived in the shadow of the Bagram Air Base, the story of the great explosion is woven into the fabric of their history. An old man named Abdul tells the story to his grandchildren. He remembers being awakened not by the sound but by the shaking of his house. The roof collapsed, his family scrambled into their small courtyard. He looked up and saw the sky on fire. He believed it was the end of the world, a punishment from Allah. He describes the rain of hot metal pieces of shell casings and twisted steel falling into their fields, setting the crops ablaze. A woman named Fatima speaks of the terror and confusion. Her village was a few miles from the base. The shockwave shattered every window in her home. Her children were screaming. She gathered them close, hiding in a corner reciting prayers as the world outside roared. In the morning she saw the devastation, neighbors were dead, homes destroyed, but she also remembers a strange feeling of awe. The power of the Shiravi, the Soviets, seemed limitless. On this night their power turned against them. It felt, she said, like a miracle, a terrible, frightening miracle. The Mujahideen presented the event as a masterful military operation. Their commanders claimed a meticulously planned attack, a demonstration of growing strength and sophistication. Whether true or not, it became the fighters' truth. The story was told around campfires in the mountains and in secret city mosques. Proof that David could defeat Goliath, that faith and cunning could overcome brute force. Why does this event, a forgotten explosion from a long-ago war, still matter today? It matters because it is a timeless lesson written in fire steel. It teaches us about the arrogance of power. The Soviet Union, a global superpower, believed it could tame Afghanistan with the sheer weight of its military might. The mountain of ammunition at Bagram was the ultimate expression of that belief. The explosion was a violent rebuttal, a reminder from history that power contains the seeds of its own destruction. When you build a mountain of gunpowder, you create the possibility of a volcano. This is a lesson that every nation, every leader, should remember. The story of the Bagram disaster is also a lesson in the hidden costs of war. The official histories often count the battles won and lost, the territory gained and held, but they rarely count the cost of logistical failures, of accidents born from carelessness and hubris. They do not count the psychological wounds carried by soldiers who were betrayed by their own side's incompetence. They do not count the civilian lives shattered by a disaster that had nothing to do with combat. The Bagram explosion reminds us that the destruction of war is not limited to the battlefield. It ripples outwards in unexpected and devastating ways. As we stand here in 2025 looking back, the Bagram airbase itself is a testament to this repeating cycle of history. After the Soviets left, the Americans came using the very same base as the center of their own long war in Afghanistan. They too built up massive stockpiles of weapons and equipment. They too faced a determined insurgency, and they too, ultimately, withdrew, leaving behind a country still caught in conflict. The scar on the landscape at Bagram is not just from the Soviet explosion. It is a scar left by decades of foreign intervention, a permanent mark on the land and its people. The story of that terrible night in 1985 is more than just a historical footnote. It is a cautionary tale. It warns us about the dangers of underestimating an opponent, of prioritizing convenience over safety, and of believing that military force alone can solve deep-rooted political and cultural conflicts. The echo of that massive explosion is a whisper that travels through time, reminding us of the enduring, explosive, and self-destructive nature of war.